This presentation is about how to build a six-figure memoir ghostwriting career. And if you're new to the world of the Substack and make writing your job, and a little bit of background about me, I traveled full time for 5 years. And what I loved the most about traveling was that I got to travel when have a flexible work schedule, be able to work from my laptop, being able to see the world and not have to be, tied to a remote job or an in-person job. And while I was traveling, I was also writing books, freelancing, and writing on Substack, which is probably where you found me. So the secret to the sauce to making all of this possible is freelance memoir ghostwriting. I think that this version of freelancing is incredible. And so for those of you who are unfamiliar with what freelance memoir ghostwriting is, a client has a life story that they want to tell. Sometimes it's a blend of a life story with something like self-care or business advice. And so some memoirs are these like really interesting blends of memoir, a business book with a personal story or a how-to book with some sort of personal story. So they're kind of like hybrid memoirs, and those are really fun. And so clients approach you to interview them and write their book. And then the fun thing about memoir ghostwriting that I discovered pretty early on in my career is that memoir ghostwriting also comes with some interesting perks, like being able to be flown out to visit your clients in beautiful destinations around the world. I've been flown out to visit clients in places like Austria, Singapore, Canada, and Greece. And so if you want travel to be baked into your freelance writing, I think that memoir ghostwriting, it feels in a way that like journalism used to feel when journalism was properly funded and when we actually had, those opportunities for people um, to be able to experience, really doing deep research about a subject, getting to know what it was, what it is like to travel and to do research and get to know the people that you're interviewing for these memoirs. And the one thing that I put in the Sunday newsletter today as well is that the global ghostwriting service market is growing. So it was said to be about 1.32 billion in 2024 and is said to be growing to 2.23 billion by 2031. And so while this talks about the entirety of the ghostwriting services market, which includes things like social media ghostwriting as well as book ghostwriting does make up a significant piece of this because anybody you see on a TED Talk stage, they have a book. Anybody that you see who is, a prominent public figure, they have a book, sometimes multiple books. And because of this need to have a book for influence, this market is growing. And while I hate math, I will do some math for you because I love you guys. And when it comes to thinking about your career and hitting six and seven figures as a freelance writer, there's a few different ways that you can do pricing. And we're going to get into pricing more a little bit later in this presentation. So when it comes to the memoir math, if you do two memoirs a year at $20,000 and then something like 10 content writing projects at $6,000 per project, that's a six-figure a year. If you do three memoirs at 33,000 per memoir, that's a six-figure year. If you do two memoirs at 50,000 each, that's a six-figure year. And two memoirs at 500,000 each, that's a seven-figure year. And yes, that is absolutely possible when it comes to memoir ghostwriting. So how long did it take to write a book? So I've met some really impressive writers that are like incredibly like they're on it. They do social media copywriting, they do YouTube script writing, they do, you know, ghostwriting for Substack. They do everything but book ghostwriting. And they come to me and they're like, I could never write a book. Like that is too daunting. And I think that this is something that people don't think about when it comes to all of the other types of freelance writing you might be doing in your life, whether you're pitching for publications, you're getting your pieces published in Business Insider, you don't really recognize that like all of the writing that you're doing on Substack for social media for clients, you're probably already writing a book's worth of material already. And so when I'm thinking about like how long does it take to write a book? So most of the memoirs that I work on are around 60,000 words, sometimes 70,000 words. Obviously, you're going to have some clients that have a magnum opus and they're just like, this book needs to be 100,000 words, which is crazy. But usually most of the life stories that I work on fall somewhere around 60,000 words. And that book is around usually 25 chapters, and that includes about 2,400 words per chapter. And so when it comes to the words per chapter, I think I usually do about two chapters per week for about 12 weeks or 3 months. And so that's a good writing schedule that I think is a pretty solid amount of time to write the first draft of the book. And so if you break that down into words, that's 4,800 words per week or 960 words per workday if you're working 5 days per week. I know some memoir ghostwriters who like to work, 3 or 4 days a week, and so they just write more words per day. Personally, it takes me about 1 to 2 hours per day of writing to for 3 months to complete that initial book draft. But some people, to spend 2 to 3 hours. And when you're thinking about memoir ghostwriting, you might be, wow, 960 words a day, that actually feels like a lot. But when you think about memoir ghostwriting, you're not creating that material from scratch. You have interviews, you have things that you're working from. So that's the one thing that you don't quite know in terms of like, it's not something you have to be completely generating from scratch. So you're working with the material your client's already given you. So that's why I think it's a little bit easier than if you're writing, a fiction book, for example, or something completely from yourself. And then so a little background about my experience as a memoir ghostwriter. I have been freelancing in the memoir ghostwriting space for the past 10 years. And then I really focused on this niche within about the last 3 to 4 years. And now it's the only type of freelance writing that I offer as a six-figure writer. And so this is something that I've done for a long time. And I didn't fully know that it could be the only thing that I focused on until the last 4 years when, first of all, clients have gotten really comfortable using Zoom thanks to, 2020. And second of all, the demand for books has also come with this wave of people finally returning to reading. And you can see that in just in the terms of like, Barnes and Noble's coming back from the dead. People are picking up books. There's been a huge increase in readership thanks to this like return to reading when people realize that the antidote to scrolling is reading. And so there's been this resurgence of a memoir that I think is really cool. So the secret to getting hired as a freelance memoir ghostwriter is understanding how to position yourself to be an undeniable yes to your dream clients. And so this is the secret sauce that I'm going to share with you in this presentation through these different topics. So we're going to cover how to set rates that reflect your value and attract serious clients. We're going to talk about where to find high-paying memoir ghostwriting work. We're going to talk about my signature workflow for managing complex life stories and all of the projects. I use pretty much the same workflow, how to build long-term high trust client relationships, what it actually looks like to run a sustainable ghostwriting business. And so in part one, we're going to talk about laying the groundwork. So before you even decide, yes, I'm going to become a memoir ghostwriter, here are some things that you should think about. And you likely already qualify, but you should still double check. So the first thing that you need is narrative chops and deep empathy. You need some sort of writing ability, even if you're more of a beginner. And I say deep empathy because you're going to be interviewing clients that are going to be completely different from you. And you're going to want to understand, how can I relate to them? How can I, ask questions that get to the soul of their story? Then you also need a project management brain. I say this because sometimes clients who hire memoir ghostwriters are less than organized, and they really need you to like help guide them through the process, to lean on you to walk them through certain pieces. They need you to kind of make sure that you're their shepherd through the book writing process, and also so that you can provide the structure that they need and keep them on track as much as keeping yourself on track. You also need a healthy audacity to quote scary high rates, higher than you've ever quoted before. And I say this because when you're thinking about memoir ghostwriting, it takes a lot to write a book. And you want to make sure that you're quoting something that not only fits what you need to get paid to have a comfortable life, but you should also reflect the time and energy you're putting into this book. The fact that if you're being a memoir ghostwriter, you're going to be anonymous. So that's why ghostwriters get paid more, is because you're writing under someone else's name and they get to have the royalties and the success and the social clout of having a best-selling book that you wrote for them. And so that's why you have to be willing to quote higher rates than you've ever quoted before for any other type of project. You also need to have curiosity about other humans' messy lives. This is the thing that I love about memoir ghostwriting. I get to meet people that I never would have met in my entire life. They get to kind of show me about their culture, about their lives, about their day to day. I meet their families. I go to their family reunions, and having that curiosity about other people's lives is just really helpful for this job, because if you're not curious, then this is not going to be the right form of freelancing for you. So one of the first things that you need is to build a portfolio before you go after any clients or apply to any jobs. And yes, you need a portfolio, but you don't need clients to make your portfolio. There are a few different things that you can do to create your portfolio, such as writing a mock chapter of your own memoir or writing a sample chapter of a celebrity's memoir, like Beyonce. I'm sure she won't mind. And then turning a Substack essays or a collection of Substack essays of yours into, adding those to your PDF to showcase your voice, how you tell stories, and your narrative range, which is really important. We had a class stack all about this, and so I recommend checking that out because I talked specifically about building your portfolio for memoir ghostwriters as well within this class stack. And that is, you can find on the Substack page. We're going to begin with talking about how to set your rates for memoir ghostwriting because it is a little bit different than some other forms of freelance writing. I highly recommend beginning with an hourly rate calculator, and I'll share mine with you after class. And so this is helpful to understand what is your minimum hourly rate to pay your bills and live comfortably. Because when you're on a conversation with a client, they're really flashy. They might be an Olympian or celebrity or somebody that you really want to work with. And they're like, I don't know if that rate can work for me. What about this? You need to know when to say no, and when to walk away, and when to return to them and being like, hey, the lowest I'll go is this. And so you need to understand where your ideal rate is and then also the lowest that you'll go. And so the way that you also need to kind of estimate not only the hourly rate, but also a fixed rate, because a lot of clients like to work on fixed rates for memoir ghostwriting. So estimate how many hours it will take for you to complete a memoir. And this might be hard if you've never written a book before, but you can go back to some of the math in the earlier present part of this presentation and break down, okay, if it's a 60,000 word book, how long does it take me to write 1,000 words and kind of going from there. And so when you have like a very rough estimate of how many hours it will take you to complete your a memoir, add a 30% buffer. Things go wrong. Revisions sometimes end up being larger than you anticipated. And then this is now your minimum fixed rate for a memoir. So multiply your hourly rate times the number of hours that you will take to complete a memoir at a 30% buffer. And this is the absolute minimum that you will charge as a fixed rate. And so knowing your fixed rate and hourly is really helpful before you start talking to clients. You can just charge an hourly rate to keep it simple. I did this a lot when I was getting started, but you should have a fixed rate in mind if clients want to work that way, because I've encountered a lot of, especially the higher end clients, just want to do a fixed rate. So when it comes to rates, a lot of people come to me and are like, Amy, what are your rates? Or what is the average rates in the industry? And so honestly, other writers' rates don't matter. It's really how much can you charge? What's your baseline? What is your ideal? Because I've met best-selling authors who've written high-profile memoirs for celebrities, for politicians, and they charge $250,000. Other ghostwriters charge $500,000 per book. Even if they don't have any public celebrity ghostwriting credentials. And then some ghostwriters charge $50,000 a book or $20,000 per book. So everybody's going to charge differently. And the most important thing is that you do not go below your minimum rate. It will make you resent the client and the project, and it'll just be a bad situation for everyone. So it's really important to have respect for yourself and the client. And if a job comes in, you're like, I don't know if this is going to be at the rate that I want it to be, that you know how to turn it down. And if you're in need of a financial cushion in between memoirs, I highly recommend considering doing content writing and content ghostwriting. So I ended up, when I got started into memoir ghostwriting, I started by writing blog posts for my one of my first clients. And so I was just writing posts for him about his life and his story. And about halfway through writing these like 20 blog posts, he was like, you know what? I think there's a book here. Will you help me turn this into a book? And so content writing is a good way to get your foot in the door, especially if you're doing content ghostwriting. And so there's a lot of people out there who will hire you for ghostwriting for Substack, for LinkedIn, for their social media. We recently had a job for ghostwriting on YouTube, again, kind of like a romantic comedy theme. And so there's a lot of different kind of jobs out there that kind of allow you to flex your muscles and get to know different clients who in the future could want to hire you for your memoir. And so don't be afraid to lean into these jobs that are not quite memoir, but memoir adjacent or kind of near the memoir ghostwriting kind of zone, especially if you're wanting to have some versatility while you're building up your memoir ghostwriting portfolio and clients. One thing that I think everybody forgets is that everything is negotiable. Everything is negotiable. And that is not just clients trying to negotiate your rates down, but it's the other way around too. I've had clients pay 10 times what they thought that they were willing to spend on to hire me, and they were happy with their choice. They literally said that in their testimonial after they worked with me. And that's because when it comes to negotiating, they'll hire the person that they're most excited for the job at the highest level of their budget, and that's usually not what's posted. And that is true for the writing job board as well. So when we're talking about finding clients, if a client says what their rate is on a job board, that might be their budget for what they're willing to pay for a memoir ghostwriter, but it also might not be. So you're welcome to, negotiate with clients, whether it's, on a discovery call or, finding different ways to kind of pitch your clients on like, hey, I know you have your budget of this for the book, but my rate is this. Are you comfortable with that? Is something you're willing to work with? And so knowing that you can negotiate, and this is not just for the writing job board, this is anywhere. Any client who comes to you, any posted job that you see on LinkedIn or anywhere else, you can always negotiate. And I think this is the one thing that I feel like I learned way too late and I didn't fully realize. And then when I learned it, I kind of was like, oh, it's all about showing the value that you can give to clients, and then they're going to be the ones who can then decide if it's going to fit in what they're able to do. But I found that clients will always stretch a little bit if they really want to hire you. So it's just inspiring that like, oh, I have to work with this person, kind of feeling in them. So in terms of where to find memoir ghostwriting clients, obviously we have memoir ghostwriting jobs here on the writing job board, which is part of the Substack. Freelance platforms like Upwork and Reedsy have been really helpful, especially if you're earlier in your career and kind of building things up. I've made over 300K on Upwork, which is a platform people say that they can't find work on. But I think in the beginning, when you're building your career or kind of like trying to get those samples that are more book length, I think it's a good place to start. And Reedsy, I've heard people had success on. And so if you're curious about people's experience with Reedsy, I'm not on that platform, but you can also jump into the subscriber chat and see what people think. But some of the best clients will come by referral or they'll find you directly, which is why you have to be findable. And what do I say when I mean findable? You really want to position yourself like a magnet. And so there's a few different ways that clients can find you. So they can find you by a website. So if you have a website, and you definitely should have a website, and we'll talk about this in a future class, then your website should have SEO that has, blog posts and pages that say, hire a memoir ghostwriter or work with me, like your name, comma, memoir ghostwriter, and sharing case studies, or if you don't have case studies, just information about your memoir ghostwriting services. Same thing on Substack. Like Substack is a great place to show your voice and your consistency and your personal essays, and weekly posts can kind of double as client lead magnets if you're saying like, here's how to work with a memoir ghostwriter. Here's kind of my process as a memoir ghostwriter. And so putting that out there is a great way for clients to start to think about, oh, I understand the best way that I can like work with a memoir ghostwriter is working with this person. LinkedIn is also huge, especially if you want to do business memoirs, which are a really fun category. I've loved working with founders. I think founders are a really interesting category. And so on LinkedIn, it's, you can post different kind of, posts on LinkedIn in that feed, but you should also change your headline to something like, freelance memoir ghostwriter for founders so that people can find you and immediately know what you do. And then, of course, the in real life network, the people that you meet at different events, at different conferences, referrals within your network. You can always offer people in your network a referral fee if they help you land a client. You can also speak at masterminds and retreats and events. You can even go to a co-working space or a Soho house and be like, hey, I'm sure your members want to hear about memoir ghostwriting. Let me talk to you about that. So those are all the different ideas, the different ways that people can find you. The one way that I just don't think works for memoir ghostwriting, and I've tried this in many different ways. And in the Q&A section, I'd love to hear if anybody else has some tips on this. But cold outreach. I've been able to do cold outreach in terms of just emailing people successfully for content writing and copywriting jobs, but I have never landed a project where I reached out to the client first. And so me being like, "Hello, can I write your life story?" And it doesn't work. Even if you're reaching people who are able to afford their life story or interested in it, becoming findable is kind of a better way psychologically, because then they have a bias of, oh, I found this memoir ghostwriter, I chose this memoir ghostwriter, and so it kind of gives them like that bias of that selection bias. And so but if you are able to crack cold email memoir sales, I would love for you to drop it into the subscriber chat, and then I'll send you cake and perhaps also a comp annual subscription. So when it comes to memoir ghostwriting, everything starts with confronting fear of the unknown. And when I got started in memoir ghostwriting, I was terrified. I had this apartment in Los Angeles where I overlooked this parking lot. And if you really craned your head and looked to the right, you could see the Hollywood sign like between like wires and like, not so great, like broken down apartment buildings. And when I was just starting, I was like, how on earth am I going to get these people to hire me to do their memoirs? I've really enjoyed the work that I've done, but how do I do it? And I just kept putting myself out there. And this was the apartment where I got my first memoir job, where the first client flew me out to interview them. And I was like, wow, this is so cool. Like, and I just remember myself at LAX, like typing like at like a Starbucks and just being like, wow, I really made it. And now I'm really lucky to be able to work with these clients full time and to be able to go to really beautiful places pieces, but I wasn't always, confident in my abilities because you have to learn how to make friends with imposter syndrome. And the confidence that you perform now becomes the confidence that you own later. And I found that really being able to kind of dig in and having projects go well was the secret to building that confidence. And starting small, starting on content writing, and then kind of growing from there and doing my first memoir and then getting a bigger memoir. And like that was those baby steps really helped with confidence building. So let's say that clients are finding you. Now what? So this is my client workflow. You're going to have to change it a little bit for yours, but here's some secrets and some things that I found in terms of strategies of walking clients through the workflow process that keeps them engaged, excited to work with you, and all of the little pieces that I've learned over the years. So the first step is to share your portfolio and your calendar link for a discovery call. So client has either reached out to you or responded to a posting that you've reached out to on a job listing. And I highly recommend that not only sending your PDF portfolio, which we talked about in the portfolio class, but also sending a calendar link for a discovery call. So often I found that as a freelancer, when I used to send like clients like blocks of times that I was available and be like, pick one, it just like took too long. And so I highly recommend using a service like Calendly, or there's a bunch of free ones too, where you can just send like a client your calendar link and they can just pick a time and it auto generates the Zoom call. I know a lot of us are already using this, but I'm sure that this is something that if you're not already doing, it's an easy win. I saw it immediately increase the times that I got booked for discovery calls. So highly, highly, highly recommend doing that. So step two is a discovery call. I recommend keeping these to about 30 minutes long. And I recommend really trying to, listen to your client, ask them guiding questions about their book, what they want to get out of the book, the transformation they're seeking to achieve through writing their book that you can help them with, and then pitching your services as a solution to that transformation. And so those are kind of all of the things that you need to fit into a 30-minute discovery call, which can be you have to get your 10,000 hours in this. This is something that it takes time to really nail how you pitch yourself. And I feel like I'm changing my pitch ever so slightly so often. And then this is also something that also recommend getting a sense of like, do they want to self-publish their book? Do they want to traditionally publish their book? Like, what are their goals with the book? Because you need to address that in presenting yourself as a solution to their book. So it's a lot to squeeze into 30 minutes, but I recommend keeping it to 30 minutes because you really want to, protect your time. And then step three is after the discovery call is over, sharing your proposal, which should include rates, timeline, and next steps. And the proposal is really important. You want to make sure that you're kind of summarizing the things that you described on the call about your process, how you'll work together, next steps, what your rates are, how you do billing, when they can expect to pay what, and all of those things. So the proposal is really important, but it's also not just a proposal, it's a persuasive document. You also want to use your proposal as, hey, I heard that you wanted to do your memoir because you want to become a speaker and you want to share your story. You want to be on stages and connecting with like-minded people and inspiring people to have the resilience you had in your own life. It would be great for me to help you with this book so that you can achieve that by A, B, C, X, Y, Z. And so really trying to kind of like put the client's journey into the framework of what you're able to provide as an author. And you never want to overpromise and under deliver. You want to flip it. You always want to underpromise and over deliver. But the proposal should still be persuasive in the ways that you're excited to work with your client and how you can help them. When the client has said yes, they've paid your initial invoice, they've signed your contract, it's time to do initial interviews. So this is a really exciting stage of the process because it allows you to capitalize on the client's real like excitement to start working with you and just be like, all right, tell me your whole life story. And I highly recommend just like making sure that you just like block out a bunch of time and you really go in depth with them as many, hours that they want to go, as many days in a row. This is the brain dump that you're capturing on that excitement, kicking off the process. And I highly recommend that you record everything. So record Zoom calls, record phone calls. Whenever I'm in person with clients, like I'm running around with my iPhone, just like recording everything that they're saying and trying to make sure that I'm capturing it all. Once you've received all of that information, you just become a sponge and you just like absorbed everything about their life. And maybe you visited them in person, maybe you've traveled to their hometown, maybe they've introduced you to new foods and new cultures and new things. Then it's time to write the book outline. I do two book outlines, one that's a bigger picture outline, one's a chapter outline, but it's, your process is going to be different depending on how you approach this. But the goal of the book outline is to get yourself on the same page that your client is and being like, hey, this is what this book is about. Agreed? And they have to say, yeah, that's great. Or no, we forgot this huge chunk of my life and things like that. So it's important to use the book outline stage as a way to sync with your client and to better understand what's missing and to also get the client approval to move to the next step, which is going to be the draft. And so one of the biggest lessons that I learned when it comes to ghostwriting, especially full books, is that when you are writing the draft, it's important that you share the chapters week by week. And this sounds like a little counterintuitive because you're like, what if my client's gonna like come and nitpick? And what if we just end up doing all these revisions? I have never had that happen. It is something that you want to protect against. But the thing that I've experienced more often is that if I just go away and write the book and give it to my client, they're like, yeah, cool, thank you. And then like, do I really like, does this really resonate with me in the way that I'm expecting? Versus if you're delivering it chapter by chapter, the client feels involved. They're able to like give some feedback, they're able to tweak some things, but they're also able to see it unfold chapter by chapter and they get excited for the next chapter. And so I really recommend involving your clients in this process because it just makes them happier and it feels more transparent for them. So they see that you're working. You're not just like sending them invoices from the void and being like, the book's coming soon. So I do recommend this. I think that this works so much better. And I feel like my clients have been the happiest when I do this instead. Then you move through full revisions. It depends on how many revisions you want to offer the client. I usually recommend at least two. And then from there, it depends on if you want to offer editing, proofreading, beta reading, so bringing in other readers to read and give feedback. I usually recommend outsourcing this to get some new eyes and like letting your client know, hey, like I want to hire like these people to help with this. And so it kind of just depends on how you want to operate, or if you want to send them to, another source and being like, hey, like go to the Substack job board and hire a proofreader for your book now that it's done. So it's up to you if you want to do that. But you need to understand how to like get their draft published ready before you wrap up the project. So, what not to do as a memoir ghostwriter? So, avoid more than one follow up to your client if they don't respond. If they aren't getting to move forward, they won't be the right fit for you. Now, I have had clients who are on the discovery call. They're like, this is amazing. I'm so excited. I'm ready to get started. Send me the contract, send me the invoice. Let's go. And they're celebrating. I'm celebrating. Everything was great. I sent them the contract. I sent them the invoice, and then they totally ghost. And it happens even to the most experienced of us, and it is annoying. I'm sure most of us hate to be ghosted. And even at the beginning stages, when you're trying to set up a call with the client, sometimes they might be like, yeah, this time works, and then they disappear. Sometimes clients don't show up for calls at all. And so this part of the process is incredibly annoying, especially once you're getting excited about working with them. You're like, oh my gosh, I can't wait to work with this Olympian, this founder, this, real housewife. Like you're excited to dive into whatever their story is. And then they just disappear on you. This is a huge red flag. And you should pretty much never work with clients that just completely ghost and disappear. Because often clients who ghost before you even begin or are very unresponsive in the beginning stage of the project, they're just going to become more unresponsive throughout the project. Remember, your clients are at the best they will ever be at the beginning of a project because they have energy, they're excited, and like you have that new project vibe, and everybody's like locked in. If they aren't, then you don't want to work with them. You also want to be careful about working with clients who seem like they're about to have a meltdown, they're in a huge crisis, they have a lot of unprocessed feelings. And I don't say this to be negative. I say this because I've gotten into some bad situations earlier in my career when I took on projects with clients who clearly were going through some things that they shouldn't have been writing a book, they should have been going to therapy. And that's sometimes something that people can, they're like, oh, wow, I went through all this trauma. Let me go write a book when they should be processing it in a healthier way. And so I say this just to protect yourself, to be careful, and also be aware of projects that feel too emotionally draining. Every writer is going to have a different approach about, like, oh, I can't take on projects like this because they're too draining and I need to protect my energy. So things to think about. And some more tips for working with clients. When you're on the initial interviews, I highly recommend really listening, like reframing what they're telling you, reflect back to your client what you're hearing to really show that you're on the same page and to make sure that you understand like what the client's intent is. You should only talk about 5 to 10% of those initial interview calls, only to ask questions, answer questions, and guide the conversation, because you really want your client to just be in a space where they can just talk. Because I found some of the best material is from just letting the client just talk and just kind of see where it goes. And this is something that can feel a little intuitive because you're just like, oh, well, I have 10 more questions I want to ask my client, and we're already on hour two on question one. This is crazy. But sometimes like that material will help steer where the book is meant to go because you want to follow your client's, instincts. But at the same time, if they're really kind of going completely on a tangent, then you want to pull them back. It's important to respect confidentiality. When you're putting together your contracts, which I highly recommend doing with a lawyer, you're probably going to want to include or have to include some sort of NDA clause because these clients obviously want and are paying for your confidentiality. And remember, this is your client's book, not your book, and that means that they may make decisions that you don't really believe in. And you as a ghostwriter can recommend certain things and offer certain things, but it's up to the clients to make those decisions creatively when it comes to their book. And then this is a huge one. I say this all the time. Don't set deadlines, set timelines. You should not put in your contract, this book will be finished by this date. You should never tell your client, I will get this book to you by this Monday. You should always be like, you know what? I think this book writing process, it takes about 6 to 12 months, but every client's different. You should say things like, I'm working on your book outline. I probably will get it to you within the next month or so, but I'll keep you posted on my progress. It kind of depends. So you want to be as vague as possible. I know it sounds counterintuitive again, but I have found that so often in the book writing process, timelines shift because clients don't need to get you information that they said that they'd send you. They said that they'll send you a family tree, or they want to hop on a call to talk through like a new story that they want in the book. So never set deadlines, set timelines. Trust me, it's gonna really help you. And then another thing that helps with capturing the voice of your clients in terms of the ghostwriting component where you're writing as them, you need to listen back to the recordings of your clients to capture the client's voice, but know that their spoken voice is going to be different than their written voice because that written voice has to be elevated. It has to have like metaphors and be immersive and describe things. And so that written voice, you kind of have to create that like bridge. And what I like to do is I like to listen to the transcripts of the clients talking and like pull some like mannerisms or some words that they often use or a phrase or an ism or an idiom. And I grab that and I drop that in and then I write everything around that to sound more, more descriptive. And so I was trying to understand like what kinds of words is this client going to use? How are they going to talk? Are they funny or are they kind of like coldly cynical? Like where do they fall in that line? And this is why ghostwriting is so good if you're a fiction writer, because you're already used to doing this. You're already used to speaking in other characters' voices if you're a fiction writer. So that's why you're so good. And you're already primed to be a memoir ghostwriter if you're a fiction writer. If you've ever written fiction in your life, like this is a good field for you. One more note about onboarding clients and those initial interviews. I think it's best to, like I said, not only let your client talk, but for certain new projects, I'll literally block out like 2 to 3 weeks where I'll hop on 3 hour calls with clients on a regular basis, just to talk. And I won't call it a 3 hour call, but on my calendar, I'll block out 3 hours. And we might only talk for an hour or 2 hours, or maybe all 3 hours. And this is to really capture this momentum right away. Your goal as a ghostwriter in the beginning of the project is to go from initial interview to first outline as quickly as possible because you want to give that client an early win to be excited to work with you. And you want to capitalize on that like new project excitement and get the ball rolling right away. The projects where I haven't done this have turned into, oh, this project will be done in like, this book will be done in like 6, 7, 8 months to, wow, this project took 4 years. And in part, that's because that client, disappeared, got distracted because they were a high-powered business person, and I kept losing them to all of these other things. And so, no matter if you're dealing with, a CEO of a major company or a celebrity or an athlete or just kind of like a small town, like interior designer, like whoever you're dealing with, it's so important to try to capture their attention, keep them through the interview process, and deliver that first book outline because that's when the meat of the work really happens. And everything else kind of becomes gravy after that, but that is the stuff you need to make sure that you like pull them in and get that work done as soon as possible. So the difference between ghostwriting versus co-authoring. Ghostwriters are invisible, we get no credit, and we get 100% of the pay upon writing the book. And we often get paid more because we're anonymous. So the client gets to have the accolades and the TED Talks and the speaking fees and all that stuff as they should because it's their story and we're helping to translate that. But the co-author arrangement, co-authors get credit on the book. Sometimes you'll also get like a, written by credit. So it'll be the client's name and then your name. Sometimes the part of your pay, instead of just getting an upfront fee, is in royalties. And then you usually get paid less than ghostwriters because you get points on the back end, as we say in Hollywood. And that this is something that, I recommend ghostwriting. I think ghostwriting is cleaner. Your motivation is more aligned with the client. You're doing what they want from the book, not what you think is best for the book. You can always, offer that advice, but they're going to do whatever they're going to do. You get paid more, and then there's more financial stability because you can't control if that client decides to maybe not publish that book or skimps on the marketing and doesn't invest in it. And so the only reason why I would ever consider or recommend somebody considering co-authoring is if you were wanting to grow your reputation as a ghostwriter, if like another prince comes to you and is like, I need you to do my memoir, I'll give you co-author credit. But usually, I still think ghostwriting is better because, you'll notice that a lot of the ghostwriters for Prince Harry, they're known in the media anyways. And that's not because they broke confidentiality, it's because somebody found out, maybe Prince Harry gave him credit or acknowledgement. Like the co-author credit, I don't really believe in, but everybody should kind of approach this differently depending on what your goals are for the project. Sometimes the clients don't publish books, as I mentioned before. And sometimes the process of writing the book is enough for them to feel catharsis. I've had clients who wrote these beautiful books with me. They were just fantastic. And I was so excited for them to get out there. And they just died. And they died either because the client wanted to go traditional publishing and they didn't end up getting an agent just because the market can be fickle, or they decided to self-publish, but then felt weird about, promoting themselves and decided it was too personal. And sometimes like this whole process is kind of like therapy. And you, as the unintentional therapist, sometimes are that stand-in for them. And that's not necessarily a bad thing because being paid 500K isn't bad for being an unintentional literary therapist. But it's something to keep in mind as you're moving through this process, especially if clients are asking you to work for royalties. Know that not every book that gets written gets published, self-published or traditionally published. So, sustainable success is a memoir ghostwriter. This is the stuff because we don't want to get burned out. And that's something that can be easy to do in this niche. It's a very fast growing, well paying freelance niche, but it can also take a lot from you. So, here are all of the tools that I recommend when it comes to your ghostwriting. So, for transcribing, so I recommend recording all of the Zoom calls. And then for the transcription, I recommend using Descript. And Descript is great. You can just drop, a video or audio file and it transcribe it for you. You can also use Otter, and there's a bunch of other tools as well. For recording phone calls, I used to have to use a separate app that I would have to like merge into the calls, but Apple now has like its own call recorder button at the top left of the screen, I think. And once you hit record, it creates the file within your Notes app that you can then drag and drop into your like desktop and transcribe it there. For drafting, I recommend Google Docs or Scrivener. I think Google Docs works great with clients that you're able to like share like chapters with and get them to like leave notes in the document. But some clients are a little more old school, and if you prefer to break things down by scene, then Scrivener is really good too. For project management, I recommend project management on your side as a freelancer, not, sharing this with the client because you want to make things as simple as possible for clients. I've kind of done away with all client portals, like documents, things like that. The clients just are given a calendar link for me to schedule calls with them, and then they just click on that link and they show up and they talk and that's it. And then they just get Google Docs they can review and then things like that. So I really try to make it simple for the clients. But on my end, I personally use Notion, but I know other freelancers use Trello or Honeybook. So you can kind of pick your poison for that. For contract signing, I think Dropbox Sign is like the winner. I used to use DocuSign, then moved over to Dropbox Sign. I think it's the best. It is expensive. I know that Google Drive also just started offering signatures. So that's another one. I think that must be cheaper. And then Honeybook is another one that does project management, contract, and invoicing, but it can be a little bit clunky sometimes. Then for invoicing, I use QuickBooks because it's easier to sync with my bookkeepers, like that whole side of things on the back end. And then I use Wise for international clients, and PayPal works too. So another thing to think about for career longevity is setting strong boundaries. You want to set office hours and response windows, ideally in your contract or when you kick off a project. And then another thing that I do to really protect my time is that I no longer offer Zoom calls or phone calls during the rough draft writing process. And if we think back to the beginning of this presentation, when I was talking about doing the math of like how many hours a day you need to write a book, those like 1 to 2, 2 to 3 hours a day of writing, if you're working 5 days a week, truly are just that. Ideally, you're not going back and forth and hopping on all these calls with clients. You are sending them questions that you have to help fill in the gaps. But most of my clients give me voice memos. This has been a game changer, and I highly recommend it if you haven't done this already. So I started doing this about like 5 years ago, where I had clients just record Zoom. Like I sent them a list of questions. I'm like, you can either type your answer, we can, if you want to email me just like a chunk of text, that's great. But I also recommend you just pulling out your phone and hitting record and send me a voice memo. And I like voice memos better than like WhatsApp voice messaging or things like that. So I can save the file and transcribe it. And voice memos are great because when a client has a list of questions and just is talking into their phone, they're able to get into this flow state of telling the story that they're probably good at telling stories this way, but not writing it. That's why they've hired a memoir ghostwriter. So I highly recommend doing that workflow where each week I send them a list of questions. They, send back voice memos, and then I also send them the chapters that I'm working on. And usually they leave me not very many notes, which is great. And then I integrate those notes and then write those, add those to the chapter, and then add chapters next week. So they get every week, they get rewritten chapters, new chapters, and then questions from me. And so that's the workflow that I recommend so that we kind of cut out calls during this middle part of the process so we can stay in the flow. Because the goal here is to get the draft done. Because, like I said, clients can get distracted, they can get busy. So we have to make the process easy and pretty compressed for them to keep them focused, to keep them working through, and to add that structure so they know what to expect every week. And then I also, when if a client call is going pretty long, then I will set a hard out and being like, hey, like, I know we're running a little like pretty long into this call. Like I have a hard out in a half hour. So if we can wrap up. So this is a good way to like, if a call is getting quite long, if there's a lot going on, if you need to kind of like wrap things up, I don't necessarily set end times for calls before the call, but on the call, I'll let the client know if we passed an hour and we're starting to get to a place where I'm like, okay, we should wrap this up, then that's what I recommend is just communicating with your clients because you want to make sure that they know like how they can respect your time well, because this is a two-way street in a relationship that you also have to share your boundaries with them and vice versa. So mindset and energy management, this is stuff that is foundational that I found every time that I neglect it, I realize like, yeah, I need to be doing that. And they might feel obvious, of course, taking care of your health, eating well, walking 10,000 steps a day, doing things like strength training or whatever you feel like is works for you and your body. The other piece for memoir ghostwriting specifically is taking care of your mind. So a lot of the clients that I've worked with, in order to write a memoir, you need a lot of conflict that has happened to you. And so there's a lot of trauma, sometimes abuse, and things that have happened to these clients that are really heavy. And revisiting those memories can be tough for their memoir. And so the thing that I've learned as sometimes being an unintentional therapist is making sure that I lean on my support system, that I'm journaling, maybe seeing a therapist, make sure that you're not absorbing these clients' emotions and you're separating, work from the rest of your life. And so this stuff is important, especially if you're like me and you take on clients that can have these really heavy, challenging kind of subject matter are also really important. And so it's just something to think about with these types of projects. And then in terms of travel stipends are something that you have to think about later on in the process when you start to kind of continue to build up your repertoire of clients and experience. If you are traveling to a place like, Vienna, Austria, your contract should include a daily rate in addition to your writer fee. So you might get paid, like $80,000 for the memoir, but your travel fee is going to be separate. So I recommend doing like, some sort of daily fee, and this includes travel days for your travel, just to cover the time that you're spent that you can't work on anything else because you're traveling, you're at the location, and things like that. And separating domestic and international, travel fees plus a reimbursement for business class flights and private accommodations. You never want to stay with the client just for safety reasons. It's all very important for you to be able to book your own accommodations and for them to reimburse you. And then also another standard set of reimbursements is reimbursements for meals, ground transport, and other necessary expenses. So not necessarily a per diem, but like some sort of like, hey, if I spend like X amount, then you'll reimburse me. So having your lawyer build this into your contracts when you get to this stage is important. And I know that other ghostwriters, if they're building up to this and they don't have like a very robust contract yet, they just like state like for 3 days of travel, it's X this amount for domestic and this amount for international. So you can keep it simple, but eventually I recommend some sort of thing like this. But talk to your lawyer because they'll help you with that. And so, as we're wrapping up this presentation, I just want to say that if you're curious more about like the writing mindset and the different kind of pieces of like how to go into like pitching these luxury clients and things like that, I'm working on a new book. And if you're wanting to be a beta reader and give some feedback, that'd be awesome. I'm going to share that link after class as part of the replay with all of the links to the things like the hourly rate calculator and all of that. So I'll share that after class. But as we're getting to the end of this, I wanted to see if there are any questions, and then I'll also keep up with the chat as well. So if anybody wants to ask a question, you can just jump on and then and unmute yourself. And Allison, I see you, and then we'll go from there.
Thank you so much, Amy. This is awesome. My question is about the going chapter by chapter and the outline. I'm assuming that there may be times when a client decides that one part of their story should come at a different part of the book. And since it's their book and you are the one that kind of wrote the outline, how do you suggest setting boundaries when it comes to the outline and the revising? Do you advise them to wait until those two revisions, or do you do it as you go?
So it kind of depends on how you want to do this process. Like, I think it's better to address client concerns in real time, unless it's like a huge, like colossal rewrite. Then you might be like, oh, thank you for that note. We're going to keep going on our plan. But then once we get to the first revision, then we'll take care of that. And so I think it's better to address as much as you can in that first pass so that your client feels like a lot of work is being done. Like psychologically, it just kind of seems to help better if you're like, if they feel like things are happening in real time so that you can have those one or two revision passes be a little lighter. Um, and so then it kind of depends on like how you want to structure your contract. If you're like, I only want to offer one revision pass because I know I'm probably going to be doing a lot of revisions in the writing itself. And so kind of just having in mind like how you're billing and then and keeping in mind like how much revision do you are you feeling comfortable doing in the actual draft process itself. So I hope that that helps answers the question.
Thank you.
Um, yeah, of course. Thanks, Allison. So Lisa in the comments said, do you work with multiple memoir ghostwriting clients at one time, or do you just focus on one client at a time and give them your undivided attention until their book is completed? This is a great question. Everybody's going to be a little bit different. In the beginning, when I was like more kind of getting started, I would work with multiple clients at one time, but it does take a lot out of you, especially if like one client is like really bright and cheery and their book is about like how they found art and love like through like painting their way through Europe, and then another client is about the time that they like escaped like the darkest like cult that you've ever heard of on earth. And like doing things like those two books at a time can sometimes be a relief and sometimes just feel really jarring when you're like, okay, and I got to switch gears to this now. So it depends on what you're able to juggle as a writer, but I recommend ideally not stacking two rough drafts on top of each other. So if you're doing that 3 month drafting process, then having like a month break and then, doing a 3 months drafting for another client. So trying to stagger clients. And this is why a lot of memoir ghostwriters do wait lists, is to try to help stagger those projects, if that makes sense, Lisa. And then Sarah, I saw you raised your hand.
Yeah, hi. Thank you so much. This was great. So I just have a question about creating your portfolio. So I currently work as also a freelance ghostwriter. And I do write a lot of memoirs, but I work for an agency, so I don't actually like really communicate too much with my clients. But when it comes to like sending my portfolio, so I've had like certain clients reach out and like suggest or show interest in writing a book, but I can never send them like they want to see, okay, I want to see things you've done, but like I signed NDAs for all my projects. So I don't have like this robust portfolio I can show them, even though I have a lot of books that I've written under my belt. So like what do you suggest for being able to like show clients work you've done if you can't actually share the work you've done?
Yeah, no, this is a great time to lean into the mysteriousness and then fill your portfolio with other pieces. And so when clients ask you, like, can I read your other books? You'll have to be like, you know what? I've signed just like a bucket of NDAs. However, I can show you these things. And this is where having a Substack is really great because you can send them personal essays. On the job board, we constantly have like people hiring for personal essays and paying for personal essays. So getting published in like a big magazine or a publication for a personal essay, from Business Insider to the New York Times to LA Times Times or something like that is a great way to build your portfolio and also have some social proof, being like, oh, I was paid to write this personal essay. I think personal essays are really great for memoirs because you're writing in your first person voice, you're showing off your chops for narrative, and then you're also getting paid to do it as well. So it not only is something where you can also, sometimes on personal essays they allow you to link to your personal website, which boosts you in search. But you also have that social proof for yourself and your career as a writer, as well as your memoir ghostwriting. So doing things like that, and then also writing a chapter of your parents' memoir, your grandparents' memoir, and kind of doing things like that. That helps because yes, with the client work, the unfortunate part is it's just like there's so much, confidentiality that we all deal with as ghostwriters and your work at an agency. So I think that should help you if that helps.
Yeah, thanks so much.
Yeah, thanks, Sarah. Um, and then Lillian asked, will we get a copy of the written materials you referred to during the class? Yes, so I'll send a follow-up email when the replay is live with all those links as well. And then Stephanie, hi Stephanie. It's Stephanie and I met in Tuscany. It's so nice to see you. Okay, voice memo. Does that mean they have your phone number? And if so, do you create boundaries around that? Yes, clients have my phone numbers, but I create boundaries around that. They're able to schedule meeting times during like the interview period or the rewrite period. And they're usually pretty respectful with that. It's up to you if you want to offer your phone number. You can also just have clients email those voice memos to you if you want to do that as well. But having those office hours in your contract so clients know when to like respond to you is kind of helpful. You can set up a business phone number, but I think it's more complicated than it's worth. Yeah, awesome. It's nice to see you, Stephanie.
You too, Amy.
Cool. Yeah, I love all your books in the bookshelf. It looks very, very writerly there. Cool. All right, I'm scrolling back through the chat, but if anybody else has a question, feel free to jump in. Cool. We have a question here about, do you typically bill a client for the full rate in advance, or how do you structure the invoices? So again, every writer's a little bit differently. If you're doing hourly, I recommend invoicing each week so that you are getting paid as the project is going. I've had clients, especially who are on the hourly, that they can kind of sometimes disappear more because they're just like they don't feel like they have skin in the game. So I do recommend getting a big deposit if you're doing hourly. So at least like a quarter of the project upfront as a deposit that's non-refundable. That is just to, book your time to get started because there is so much work that goes in upfront with the memoir. And then doing weekly billing for hourly. When it comes to, a bigger, flat rate, I think that you should get a big chunk up front and then you should divide it by deliverables. So that's what I do. So I have my deposit and then doing one by like the delivery of the first outline, the delivery of the second outline, the delivery of the commencement of the rough draft. Because you can also bill upon starting a milestone, and I think that that's really important because if you are like, oh well, most of the payment's going to come after I deliver the rough draft. What if your client kind of disappears and then, they don't finish the rough draft until like a year longer than what they said that they would? So getting the amount that you would get paid for the rough draft upon commencement is more helpful because then you have some protection if the client dips out. And then in your contract, you can also have things like kill fees, like if the project dies, or if the project, like if the client goes ghost for a certain amount of time, you can have like fees with that too. So there's a few different ways that you can work with fee structures here. If you're newer in the memoir ghostwriting world, you might not be able to put all these in and like hire a lawyer to get that really like in depth. But as soon as you're able to, I highly recommend it because it'll really save you later. Okay. How many hours do you interview clients when you write a book? What do you do if when you're writing, you find that you don't have enough material? This is a great question. I had one client, some clients are great storytellers. Like I sometimes work with clients where I'm just like, wow, like the stuff that's coming directly from your mind feels like it can just land on the page almost exactly. And those clients are a gift and we love them. There are some clients who struggle with storytelling. And sometimes I was working with a client who couldn't really articulate himself. He really struggled with putting his thoughts into words, connecting to that emotional side, and sharing stories. And so sometimes I can get around that by interviewing their family members, people in their lives, and then taking tidbits and returning to my client and being like, listen, this person told me something really interesting. I would love to hear about that. Or, like trying to kind of like get a little bit more juice that way. And so that can be helpful. If you get to the draft and you're finding yourself falling short, you can also ask the client being like, hey, Like we've gotten like 5 chapters done or 10 chapters done. Is there anything in these chapters you think we can expand on a little bit? And that's why I try to like when I'm asking questions each week, I try to really like have the client land in their 5 senses. What did this moment feel like, taste like, sound like? And just trying to ground them in that immersive feeling of being there. Because if you can do that with a client, then they'll immediately like spring to life like different memories. And sometimes having them go dig up old photographs, listen to old music, talk to friends and family, all of that can really help kind of like awaken some of those older memories. But ideally, if you're working with a client on their book, they probably have a lot of ideas for you. So I hope that clarifies. But that can be a tricky problem. And then Talia asked, do you have a good proposal template that you like to use? So there isn't really every proposal template is going to be different depending on your skills as a writer. I can put something together that is just kind of like a template of like here's like put your bio and like your rates and like things like that. But because your process is going to be different and you're going to speak to every client a little differently, you're going to really want to tailor your proposal to them. So when I'm writing proposals, I have like my process written out. But I change that depending on the client because every client is going to want something differently. Um, and then Carol asked, are there resources on interviewing that balance personal questions with the geographical area and visual aspect that the client may want to include? Great question, Carol. This is a great question. So when it comes to balancing personal questions and also questions about, where does something take place, this is a great opportunity to once again return to those 5 senses and being like, describe this place to me, describe this person to me. What did your first girlfriend look like? And kind of pulling them back to those memories and having them describe some details. Another thing that I think is helpful is having people write out like the locations that they think are important for the book or the people and the ages that they were at the writing of the book at the time that the book is taking place, if it's taking place in like a certain period of time. So that you can, and then being like, how old was your sister at this time? What did they look like? And things like that. So try to kind of like jog their memory. But when you're starting and just doing those initial interviews, you can kind of like blaze past that. You can just like be like, let's just talk about your life. What does it mean? What does it mean to you? What do you feel like other people got wrong about you? And just kind of like trying to get that like emotional stuff up. Like, what do you want the world to know? What do you think like the world knows currently that they're totally wrong about? What do you want to leave behind when you're gone? So tying in those kind of questions that really get to the heart of like why they're writing the memoir will be really helpful so that you can get to the details of what later in the process. So when I'm sending those weekly questions to my clients, that's when I'm diving in and being like, okay, hair color. Did you change your hair color during this like section of your life? Was it pink? Explain why. Like that's kind of like when you get into that, or tell me what your first car looked like. And so that's kind of like the process that I think is helpful. But Carol, let me know if there's anything else that you want clarified with that.
Thank you very much.
Yeah, definitely. And then Jeff, you were asking, how does one find clients? And so, great question. We covered this a bit in the presentation in terms of places like the Writing Job Board, Upwork, Readsy, and then also creating that portfolio and that website to capture clients. So one of our next class stacks, either it's going to be next month or the month after, we're going to be bringing in a professional graphic designer who does freelance for websites and specializes in that. And then they're going to help talk through how to, the process of designing a website, what you need, the journey your client goes on when they're landing on your website. And then I'm also going to add some commentary about the things that I've seen that work well for freelancers and the things that do not work well, especially when your clients have a very small attention span when they are going through 10, 20, 30, 40, 50 different websites of freelancers that they're considering working with. And so that'll be something that we can cover a little bit later. But the goal as a freelance writer is to try to be everywhere, to be on LinkedIn, to be on the websites, to be on Substack. So clients, wherever they may go to find you, they have so many different opportunities to see your material, to sign up for your Substack, to sign up for maybe you have a separate email list just for clients. So like all of the different touch points that they could be in your orbit, trying to grab them and keep them in your orbit. So when they're finally ready to pull the trigger on their memoir, they're thinking about you first. And SEO is a big component of this. I've had some clients find me on AI search engines where like, in fact, like somebody who was a Buddhist priest found me on ChatGPT because I'm ranked on Google. And so they're able to find me through that. And so in the dystopian future of, like these like AI tools tools like recommending different people to others, like wanting to make sure that your website is ranked well and that that you're building a like kind of a presence for yourself so people who are looking for you can find you. Because if they're looking for writers and they're not sure how to write something themselves, you kind of like reverse engineer how they find you, if that makes sense. Cool. So I think that's all the questions we had in the chat. If anybody else has any other questions or things that they want to know about memoir ghostwriting, this is the opportunity. Hi, Caroline.
Hi there. Hello from Paris. I actually put a couple of these in the chat, but at the very end. So, a couple of things. First of all, recommendations on lawyers. You mentioned to have a lawyer look at your contract, and I'm a member of the Authors Guild. They do contract review, but this is kind of a specialized thing. So, how would you suggest we search for that?
Great question, Sherilyn. Also, Paris, I'm sure is beautiful this time this year. So I hope you're having
It's
a wonderful
hot.
summer in
It's so
Paris.
hot, and it's after midnight, so I'm like yawning. No, no, it's not about you. It's about me.
No, no worries.
Yeah.
Yeah, so when it comes to finding a great lawyer, this is something that's very tricky. I recommend just asking around, and you're going to want a lawyer specific to your state or your country or your situation,
Oh,
because every state has different regulations around freelancing. And this is annoying because otherwise, if I could just share with you guys like a sample contract, I totally would. But because even when I move my business to different states, my contract has to be redone. And so it has to be really hyper specific to, are you freelancing under an LLC or are you an individual and things like that. And then building back from there, of like the lawyer is going to ask you like all these questions, ideally about like what kinds of like raw like rules do you want for your clients about like if they miss an invoice, like do they get charged invoice like interest, like how much, like how soon. And so it's like all of these questions will be asked to you by your lawyer. And so at this point, it's
yeah.
like then you have to kind of understand how you work. And so starting on freelance platforms like Upwork or Contra or Reedsy, especially places like Upwork or Contra where they have pre-built-in contracts for you, can be helpful to just kind of put your kind of like feet out there and kind of see how it's going before you commit to like having a lawyer create all these contracts for you. But you are less protected if you are, I mean, sometimes you can be less protected if you're working with like a freelance platform's like basic, guides. And so and
Mhm.
platforms like Contra are nice because like they don't take commission of your work like Upwork does. And so you can you can bring clients on to work with you on Contra. And then sometimes they give you a kickback for doing that, but they don't charge you commission. You can use their contracts. And so if you're just getting started and like you kind of just don't want to deal with contracts yet, you can do stuff like that. But finding a lawyer by just asking around, by posting in message groups, posting in the subscriber chat, like, does anybody live in this state or like, and it has an LLC,
Country.
like, who do you use? Yeah, or country,
Yeah, right.
how do you like, who do you work with? Because it's so individual. And my lawyers, honestly, like one of the best investments I've ever made because there have definitely been clients that have been trying to have in the past tried to get out of paying me. And my
Mm,
contract was the only thing
mm.
that kept them like responsible for that.
Yeah, great. Thank you. And I had a second question, and I'm looking back in the chat. Oh, right. Do people ask you about, oh, you've written this, and how do I self-publish this, or any marketing suggestions? And I know there's people who do that, but how do you draw that line?
Yeah, every writer's going to be different because sometimes it's helpful for you to know enough about the publishing process to advise your clients and give them your feedback, especially because you're going to be the one responsible writing a book that's going to be ready to publish. And so
Yeah,
I think having a knowledge of self-publishing versus traditional publishing, some of the basics of book marketing and the book marketing timelines for both is really helpful. I'll also be bringing on a really amazing book marketer to talk to everyone, and she has done really great work. She focuses in self-publishing, which most of my clients these days are going self-publishing so they can control
right.
the royalties and things like that. But traditional publishing is its own ball game. But usually clients who go traditional publishing will want to do a book proposal first, and they won't want to start with full draft. And that's
Right.
its own kind of like set of different things. And I think that the clients that I've worked with who've done self-publishing have been the happiest with the process.
Hmm. Okay, thanks. Hmm.
Yeah, thanks, Sherilyn. Are there any other questions? And I'll also zoom back through the chat to see if anybody else.
Amy, hi.
Hi,
I was
Lisa.
just typing the question, but I thought I'd just ask you, do you presume that every book you do is going to be 60,000 words and you price it at that way, or do you offer different packages? And so if it comes in less than 60, like on the discovery call, you say, well, I don't think it's going to be 60,000 words. Maybe you'll fit into this package. And so we'll go with that pricing. So how do you do that?
Yeah, I don't deal with word count at all. I just kind of have one rate for the largest book that I can imagine that the client is pitching me. There's some projects where I've put a cap on the number of hours I'm going to be spending researching because there are certain clients that, especially with like law cases, I've done a lot of true crime cases where I'm on the phone with lawyers, I'm on the phone with like just like all of these different people that I'm just like, oh, there's like 1,000 pages of court documents to go through now. Exciting. And so with projects like that, I definitely recommend setting a cap on the number of hours you're going to be spending researching, because that can really add up over time. I have never really had clients that go above 60 or 70,000 words, especially because I work with a lot of founders that are very concise. But if you're on a call with a client and they're doing like an epic, they're like, this story spans across generations, like, and it's very clear that they're gonna like really need some time to work this out on the page, then I think that charging, just like building that into your fee and just kind of thinking about like, okay, on the upper limit, what could the longest version of this book look like? And if you're like, okay, it's around 100,000 words, then you'll know to like almost triple or double your rate to like cover that. And so that's why I think it's important to not offer packages and just kind of get a sense on the discovery call. And then you can set an upper word count limit in your contract if you're worried about it ballooning, and just be like, this contract is for this amount. Anything out of the scope of this, I'm billing hourly, and then put your hourly rate too. And so that's something that you can talk to with a lawyer about, like, okay, beyond scope, it's hourly or we're rescoping. And so, but I think that having like that hourly, like, if we go beyond this word count, if we go beyond this number of revisions or research, then it switches to hourly. I think that helps protect you.
Great. Thank you so much.
Yeah, thanks, Lisa. Okay, I'm scrolling back to the chat, but if anybody else has some questions. Erin, so are these projects always funded by the clients directly, or do you ever get added to a book contract or interact with the publishing industry? I personally do not. I've talked to book agents before. I've kind of like been in that soup of like, people being like, yeah, you'd be great for a project, things like that. Book publishing, especially traditional book publishing, for me, I feel like moves a little too slowly. Like I'm not as embedded in that world. And I've been really loving working with founders who have such a can-do attitude that they're like, we don't want to wait 2 years to write a book. And so I find that my favorite clients are come to me directly and just want to do it on their own. And I've worked with like Olympians and NBA athletes and people with management and representation, but they're just like, I don't care about that. I just want to get this book out there. And so when it comes to, if you can like work with the traditional book publishing world and you're curious about that, I think that's definitely an avenue to explore, especially if you personally want to become a traditionally published author. For me, that's not something that I'm interested in. And so it does give you excuse to like interact with agents and being like, hey, like I'm a ghostwriter, would like to help your clients and things like that. And so if you're a whiz at networking and you're like, I'm going to get in there, I'm going to do that, then I go for it. I think that's a great place because if you're wanting to ghostwrite the memoir of, somebody like Jeff Probst, because you're a Survivor fan, then you can just email them. I definitely have. I love Jeff Probst, and so if he ever responds to any of my emails, I would love to write his memoir. But I think that probably for people, some people like that, not everybody, because I've worked with people who are like in that public sphere and like on different shows, that decide not to go with their representation when they're picking a ghostwriter. But if you're really like pining for a specific person that you want to ghostwrite their memoir, then going through their representation can be a good way to do it. But you can always use that representation to just get to them. Like you don't have to like go through the publishing company. You can just like find their name of their agent on a public database and just be like, listen, I have a proposal. And there's nothing wrong with putting yourself out there, because so often like myself and the friends that I've had in the film industry and in freelancing, we've all gotten the best things by just like shamelessly emailing people, like just being like, hey, I'm a huge fan, I would love to write your book, and just see what happens. And the worst that they can do is say no or not respond to you. So I know we're kind of getting past time here. Are there any last questions before we wrap up? Anything anybody else wants to know about memoir ghostwriting? Amazing. Okay, great. Well, thank you all for spending an hour of your Sunday with me. And I just really appreciate you guys all coming out. And if you have any questions after the presentation, feel free to shoot me an email. I hope you have a wonderful day or night in Paris or out on a bike ride or surrounded by beautiful books. And if you ever have any or any requests for future class stacks, I'm starting to line up some of those like guest instructors who are going to come in and teach. Feel free to let me know. We might do more than once a month, depending on what you guys want. But it's been wonderful to spend this time with you and have a great rest of your Sunday, guys. See ya.